All right, for today we're going to look at this period of ideologies and upheavals between 1815 and 1850, and we're going to take a look at some national revolutions that do happen and that garner some support from even conservatives, as well as we're going to look at some of the reforms, mainly in Great Britain, that are pushed that alleviate some of the needs for revolutions. One of the things we're going to see in this time period, leading even up to the revolutions in 1848, is that to some extent, Great Britain is able to insulate itself from reform, partly because, from revolution, partly because it's able to institute some reforms that kind of alleviate that pressure that is put on society, almost like letting out some of the steam, so to speak. And so we're going to look at more closely at liberalism in the 1800s, nationalism, and how those forces kind of come together and battle it out, as well as socialism coming in the first half of the 19th century. As far as nationalism is concerned, we're going to look at three specific places, and we're going to try to examine their themes and how they deal with some of these calls for revolution and reform in this time period. So first we're going to start off with Greece. Greece is an interesting example because at the time the powers of Europe were trying to stop nationalism. They wanted to prevent nation states from forming. The main reason for this is as we saw in the Congress of Vienna, Metternich realized that empires like Austria, which he supported the imperial crown and he worked for them, that they depended on nationalism not succeeding. Austria was an empire that was not just formed of German Austrians, it's formed of other ethnic groups. And if you subscribe to this idea that nations deserve their own states, what's going to happen is that these different nations that you control are going to desire to break away and become independent, become sovereign states. And of course you can't survive that. So traditional conservative regimes like Russia and Austria are against it for that reason. On the other side, people fear the growing strength of Germany. If you allow German nationalism to grow, Germany is going to unify and, of course, throw off that balance of power that was so important to Metternich in the Congress system and the Congress of Vienna. So those things have to be prevented. But Greece provides an interesting case example because the Greeks, who've been controlled by the Ottoman Empire for centuries by this point, are going to lead a national revolt to break away. And what's interesting, this as an example, is it gets so much support on the continent. England, for instance, and Great Britain provides a significant support. France, and even Russia is going to aid into this struggle. And the Metternich is going to refuse, but it's a little bit too close to home for him. And he really, more than any other power, greatly fears nationalism rising up and breaking apart the Habsburg Austria. Why would Great Britain and France, who were part, at least French after Napoleon's defeat, who were part of this continent or this Congress system, want to support Greece? The answer seems to lie in their competition with the Ottoman Empire and in this what's becoming ancient struggle between Christian West and Eastern Islam. And they saw this as a struggle to support and weaken the Ottoman Empire and at the same time weaken the spread of Islam and strengthen Christianity. The Greeks had maintained their Orthodox Christianity throughout these years under control of the Ottoman Empire. And they saw a great struggle in this. There's this Lord Byron who goes and fights, the great poet, and ends up dying in the struggle, sees a great noble and romantic struggle in this. So there's a bit of hypocrisy in these states, in that they're trying to oppress the growth of nationalism at home, but supporting in other areas when it fits their need. But Greece is not lost on the national leaders of Europe, who see it as an example that national revolutions can be successful and should be supported, and that people can get their own state. But for today, I mostly want to focus on Great Britain as an example. How does Great Britain avoid these revolutions? 1848 hits most of the continent but avoids Great Britain. And the answer to that lies within Parliament. And not really what you would think. Not necessarily between a struggle between the working class and the bourgeoisie or the working class and the old aristocracy. It's really between the middle class and the aristocracy that provides reforms that actually alleviate some of the extreme tension that existed between these classes. And those reforms are probably going to prevent, for the most part, revolution in Great Britain. So, for instance, McKay writes that only about 8% of the population could vote for representatives to Parliament, and by the 1780s there was a growing interest in some there's a typo there, should be some kind of political reform. So we see that after 1815, the Tory party, or the aristocrats, they fought any kind of reform. It's going to be the Whigs we're going to look at. This is mainly going to be a fight between Tories and Whigs. And who are Tories and Whigs? Tories are conservative. They support the aristocracy, the maintaining the dominance of the aristocracy. The Whigs are going to be more middle class. And they're going to pursue liberal reforms. Now, they're not going to look at radical reforms. They're not looking to universal suffrage or anything like that. But the traditional liberal reforms, if you think 1789 French Revolution. So one of the main flashpoints in this fight had to do with the Corn Laws of 1815 and this reorganization. What the Corn Laws had basically done was they required people in Britain to buy grain that was grown in Britain. It seems great, but the problem with that was it tended to only help the aristocracy. They make their money off land. And when you require your population to only buy British goods, or in this case, British agricultural goods, you're taking away cheaper goods that could be coming from the continent. For instance, much of Europe since the 1600s has been fed by agricultural products coming from Eastern Europe. Agricultural products have been running cheaply, at cheaper prices. This is important to the poor people who need cheap food. So the Corn Laws are oftentimes seen differently by the classes. The aristocracy, the Tories, tend to love them. They gain a lot of wealth off them. The middle class sees it as another obstacle to free trade, and international free trade. And the working class just sees it basically as an attack on them, literally taking food off their table. So it's going to be something that's going to rally people towards reform. So there are going to be protests against it. And some of these protests are going to lead to some rights being taken away from working class people. But nonetheless, they're going to kind of fight that. In 1819, we see with the passage of the Six Acts that this is going to boil over in the Battle of Peterloo, what's sometimes referred to as the Peterloo Massacre. This occurs outside of Manchester when working class people basically called for open reforms. Many of them are protesting the Corn Laws, want more rights for working class people, get rowdy. Essentially what's happened is a cavalry is ordered in. There's a cavalry charge. About 14 to 15 people are killed. Hundreds are injured. And this served as an example to the British that there is real tensions between their classes in this time period, and there may be needs for real reforms. So McKay writes in the 1820s, a less frightened Tory government, who seems to be less scared of a growing revolution, moved in the direction of better urban administration, greater economic liberalization, civil equality for Catholics, and limited imports of foreign grains, alleviating a little bit of the pressure of the Corn Laws. These actions encouraged the middle class to press on for reform of Parliament so they could have a larger say in government. So again, these early reforms in the first half of the 19th century really are more of a competition between Whigs and Tories, middle class and working class, than they were working class against the wealth, so to speak. So we talked a little bit about the Chartist movement. That really is the working class calling for reform. But when we look at the Chartist movement, in the end, at least at the time period, it was a failure. I mean, they're calling for universal male suffrage. The concept being that the working class poor outnumber everybody else. And if the working class poor get the right to vote, they could basically change society from the inside, which is what Louis Blanc was arguing in France. They're not going to get that, but they're going to get some reforms that come from the Whigs that, so to speak, are going to trickle down and affect them a little bit. Part of this is going to be, we're actually just going to stop there. When I get back, we'll talk about the average potato famine, some examples of that. We're going to do some readings here on some of these early reforms today, and then some later reforms that come together. And we're going to talk about, when I get back, about how the British reforms in the British political system are going to allow for progress to be made for middle and eventually working class people that don't require the barricades on the streets and revolution, or even people turning to socialism as a solution to these to alleviate these issues.